From what I found, it's no one person that is responsible for the poor writing, but more the fact that the main creators are not all on the same page and seem to be in unacknowledged chaos. I'm gonna be real, the dysfunction and disconnects that I've seen explains so much about House of the Dragon, and more than any singular dive into Hess could.
Hi there. This is the last, I promise, in a series of reactions I've been making to Savage Books' video, Sarah Hess and the Fanficification of House of the Dragon, with Season 2. They already posted this big, almost 2-hour-long podcast on the main part of his video. I realize that's pretty long, so out of order I started by posting short video clips, about half a dozen of those. 1 to 2 minute clips of things I can quickly refute, of him claiming Sapochnik was the last Game of Thrones director on this, and after that Season 2 is a mess, when Alan Taylor is a veteran Game of Thrones director, and he was on Season 2. What are you talking about? Or that he treats everything in Season 2 for most of the video as, well, you see, Hess did this, or Hess had Daemon kill his wife, when we have a video clip of Ryan Condal stating Daemon killing his wife was specifically my idea. That this was a criticism from a structural perspective. I don't think he structured this well. I didn't cite specific arguments. And that you needed to do that, and it doesn't really hold up in terms of everything he's building there. However, because these videos are really long, another issue is not everyone watched his to the end. And it's an hour and 35-minute video. And at the 1 hour 13-minute mark, he launches into this final section. So it's about 15 to 20 minutes of this final section, which suddenly shifts gears, and you're not really supposed to shift to this entirely separate point that late in a video, and it just kind of got elided into everything else, because if people are watching a video for a full hour, they kind of tune out that you've really shifted what your core argument is. Last 15 to 20 minutes, the section titled Who Bears Responsibility, it's as if it's the second video tacked on to the first one, so I felt I need to make a separate standalone video reacting to the separate points in that, because the main podcast I did on this was on, you didn't really attribute direct quotes to Hess to prove she said these things. This is, he accuses that Season 2, behind the scenes, was inconsistent and dysfunctional. The phrase he uses, he outright says there was unacknowledged chaos among the writers and directors, and we really have no evidence of that, either from a story standpoint or a physical production standpoint. So I need to refute that. And I am not doing this as a hit piece against Savage Books. People asked, why am I doing this? I want to change his mind. And I hope he makes a reaction video. It is in my own interest for him to make a follow-up video reassessing what he did. Alex, if you're listening to this, I hope you make a follow-up on this. I'm not trying to smear you. But, well, it's what a lot of people in my comment section have already said, that this is a large and very reputable channel. Going through the backlog of Savage Books, he's made very good analysis videos. He even makes some good points in this about just observationally things in Season 2, but the behind-the-scenes stuff without evidence, people in my comment section going, I regularly watch Savage Books, and relative to his past work, I felt this was below the bar he set for himself. That you need to reassess what you're doing here. Another thing is, I think he rushed this out, because at the beginning he said, I'm making this only 2 weeks after the finale, and the rest was a month of editing, when a lot of other stuff came to light. This was before Martin even made his blog post. So with the space of time, you needed more time to assess all of this, and all the other evidence and back and forth. So I don't know. I hope Alex Savage makes a better assessment of this in light of it. And that's a key thing I never have agreed with philosophically for YouTube, is why are you reacting to a video someone else made on general principle? That isn't just expressing an opinion, but trying to build an argument, because this doesn't exist in isolation. That's the entire concept of misinformation. That people were coming onto my comment sections who I didn't recognize going, well, of course, House of the Dragon Season 2 is like this. It was so dysfunctional behind the scenes, and We have no evidence of that. What are you talking about? And I realized it's because through the telephone game of Savage said, okay, it was dysfunction, and this is why I think it was. I'm going to argue against that. Then it just turns into a meme that doesn't even need evidence. When other people are quoting it, well, of course it was dysfunctional behind the scenes. Why do you think that? Because I saw a video saying that. What evidence did they cite? I don't even remember, but I just accept that it was dysfunctional. So you see, it spreads like that, and this isn't what... And other things he said, that not once in his entire video did he cite other YouTube reports, where most of the major channels are blaming the studio for episode cuts, because it's part of a wider problem at Warner Discovery. And these aren't specific things, so all of that. What am I going to do to react against that? As far as we can tell, it wasn't dysfunctional behind the scenes. Well, like an academic article, I'm going to put my conclusions up front and clearly stated. We have no evidence of dysfunction within Ryan Condal's creative team, the writers and directors, either story-wise or production-wise. It does appear that George R. R. Martin disagrees with Condal about things in future seasons, because Martin was supportive when he went to the season 2 set, when they were filming last fall. He made a set visit, and he had seen the season 2 writer's room. He only started really getting upset by this March, which is when they probably had the season 3 writer's room or report or something came to him. And I like to hope it's because, the one example he cited is they promised me they'd put Maelor in season 3 and now they won't. I'm really hoping it'd be out of character for Condal to go back on a promise to Martin. I think it's probably because of the budget cuts. We don't know, and that's a separate argument. But something about future seasons he is having friction with Condal about. That if Martin wanted to complain about things in season 2, on screen in season 2, he would have. But apparently it's something that's not even happened yet, or he said, I'm annoyed about ripple effects of things they're not setting up. And as for production-wise, there's 8 episodes because they cut their episode budget, and before filming even began, they announced it'd be an 8-episode season. How could filming chaos have affected that they have 8 episodes when they announced it before they started? So that is what I think is going on. Crazy budget cuts from Zaslav, who I hope will be fired, pressured out by the end of the year. Some story friction with Martin that we hope is because of the cuts. But there's zero evidence. When I say zero, I mean zero evidence of friction within Ryan Condal's team. I am not trying to dismiss people who disagree with the direction he's taken certain characters, who are very different from the book, sometimes for the better, sometimes not. It's subjective. But you can make the argument that this is not in the tone of the book. And I'm a book fan myself. I'm just specifically with this video trying to refute the argument logically that these are inconsistencies. They're not inconsistencies. Condal and Hess have made consistent changes which we disagree with. And if you want to oppose the changes they're making, calling them the result of inconsistency and dysfunction is only spreading a weak counter-argument. That is taking attention away from the real criticisms of the living author told you not to do that. That it isn't unreliable narrator because I'm the narrator and I know what secretly really happened, that kind of thing. So like I said, that's my conclusion from what do I think was happening behind the scenes. What most people think there were budget cuts. But in terms of the structure of this video, I actually am going to use video clips this time because it's the way that Savage presents this that he'll confidently say something as if it's evidence when we don't know that, or that really doesn't apply. Just so happened it lined up to be 7 points. Again, 7 is a great number. But the 7 points I'm going to walk you through, and they're not all equal points, but the first and probably biggest one is, like I said, this starts an hour and 13 minutes into the video and lasts about 15-20 minutes. And Savage builds the bulk of his argument. Like, I'm going to be reading off timestamps just so you get a sense of just how long he spends on this. Like, well over 6 minutes, which is most of his speaking time, on proving there was dysfunction behind the scenes. bulk of the evidence is that different writers and directors gave different answers when asked, why is this 8 episodes instead of 10? That Condal said, oh, it was a creative choice at first, then the directors did, but then Hess said it wasn't. And oh, look how dysfunctional they are. And that doesn't even apply. That's they're unwilling to discuss that they're fighting with the parent company over funding. I thought you'd be talking about story decisions, that different writers gave alternate visions of things. That is not evidence. And again, it's the overwhelming bulk of what he actually presents. And clearly this is something they wouldn't want to talk about. A lot of them are just, repeating the party line. And it's not just a binary of, oh, was this a creative choice or not? He even goes so far as to claim that 4 different people had 4 different opinions when it's one or the other. That some said it was a creative choice, others later admitted it wasn't. And that he confidently says this was complete chaos. And that isn't writer's room chaos. That's fighting with the parent company and unwilling to admit it. That's going to be a lot of this just because it's a lot of what he said. And to run down the rest of the list of 7 points really quickly, well, points 2 and 3 are outgrowths of point 1, which was that the bulk of your evidence you cite is just that they're unwilling to badmouth that they're fighting the studio over budget. Point 2, he only cites exactly one example of what might be called writer disagreement. And point 3, only one example of what might be called physical production issues. But even then, they're not good examples. That the story thing was a question of interpretation. Is Aegon a redeemable character? Which 2 people disagreed on as much as you could disagree about, is Jaime Lannister capable of redemption? That's not rival sets of instructions given to actors. It's interpretation. And the other thing I already posted is a standalone clip just to highlight it is, oh, they ended up spending a little more on dragon shots in post-production, therefore they ran out of money before the end of the season and we got only 8. And no, they announced there were going to be 8 episodes before they filmed, much less before VFX post-production. That if you were to build the argument that there was dysfunction in the writer's room or dysfunction on the ground, you can't just cite one example, even if it's a good example. You need to build a pattern of evidence. And all he did was have 2 brief examples, both of which were not really evidence of anything. They weren't even good pieces of evidence, and if they were, it wasn't enough to prove a pattern. This leads to point 4 of 7, which is arguably his thesis that he builds towards, which is that Miguel Sapochnik was the last link to Game of Thrones, and the show fell apart without him after he left for season 2. Well, that's filled with errors and inaccurate on a couple of levels. That, as I also pointed out in the standalone clip, director Alan Taylor came back to work on season 2. He did Rook's Rest. In fact, they made it a point of emphasizing Taylor is coming to do this, because they were worried people would be upset that Sapochnik was leaving as the guy who does battle episodes. What are you talking about? Alan Taylor was here. How did you miss all the interviews he gave that were very prominent, next to the ones Kilner and Hess gave? I don't know. Or that he really attributes that Sapochnik was the one holding those 2 aspects, the writing story aspect and the production aspect, when Sapochnik has never been a showrunner before. He was technically credited as one for this, so he couldn't be overruled, like how Benioff and Weiss would sometimes overrule him on crazy things. But he would openly say, I am not part of the writer's room on this. He wasn't keeping the writers in line. I mean, he had some creative input, as much as some of the other directors have creative input on the ground when they're working with the actors figuring things out. And the things Sapochnik would be in charge of, like physical production, we have even less evidence of there being problems. That Savage goes so far as to say, I guarantee you that we would have ended with a big battle. That what? And again, this of course leads into point 5 of 7. Savage's argument is itself inconsistent, because he vacillates between saying 8 episodes was a creative choice because they like Renascent more, or actually they're in such chaos behind the scenes from a physical production standpoint, without Sapochnik that I guess they ran out of money midway through filming, that is physically impossible. And the whole argument, well, they like Rhaenys more, therefore we didn't have a big battle, that the argument itself and the way it's presented in the video has a lot of inconsistencies which could have benefited from a rewrite and revision, when not once in this video does Savage acknowledge that because of the writer's strike, they weren't allowed to do vital live rewrites and reshoots which is a normal part of the filming process. And we, the fans, have pretty much picked up, the major channels at least, the lack of rewrites really started affecting particularly like the middle of the season or something, because they had to prioritize, but not once does Savage mention this, and as a result, I think it's a very good chance he might have been unaware of it. Like, the budget stuff he dismissed out of hand, but he was at least vaguely aware that Zaslav was cutting episodes all over the place. He really is that crazy to do that to a flagship show. But Alex Savage, if you're listening to this, please make a reassessment video on the importance of rewrites and extend them the same courtesy of, this could have been refined better. And point 6, just to give a nod to the people in the comment section who are going to be pointing this out, while I am specifically reacting to the structural presentation of Savage's video, that he made a poor argument, Devil's Advocate is point 6, where I go, okay, were there things you could describe as inconsistencies in Season 2? From a physical production standpoint, definitely not. We don't have a single piece of evidence to support that. From the actual filming process, we know they cut their budget before they started filming. Are there inconsistencies in the writing or dialogue from one episode to the next? Well, that's really 2 levels. The episode-to-episode dialogue stuff is things I feel, within a reasonable doubt, these are things rewrites would have fixed. And then there's the long-running core story things with Rhaenys and Daemon and stuff, which I feel were present since Season 1, so how can you say they're inconsistent? But if you're typing now, I will go through that slowly, wait to hear what I have to say, that's a change we disagree with, but I never felt it was an inconsistency in the show. And point 7 is some stuff about how I don't like how this was presented, that was Savage meaning to do this as a hit piece on that Hess is a woman and a gay woman or not? Well, it's being appropriated like that, and that you didn't frame it as a question, you framed it as a statement. I'll talk about this, of just the framing of this, treated it as fact. I'll talk about point 7 more, of just the takeaways from this, we'll get to that. So, having presented my conclusions up front, now let's move on to specific evidence and analysis of this final section of his video, which is basically a whole second video tacked on to the end of the first one, in case you were zoning out or didn't get to it. See the link below. I'd rather you watch the whole thing first, so you're not just relying on my clips, but get the whole context. I want to present it accurately. Start at 1 hour 13 minutes, the final section, Who Bears Responsibility. 1 hour 13 minutes to 18 minutes. There's 5 minutes of preamble, which is mostly saying, I think it fell apart because Sapochnik wasn't there. I'll get to that in point 4. Then from 1 hour 18 minutes to 25 minutes, he talks about that there's unacknowledged chaos behind the scenes, both in terms of storytelling and physical production. And then the last 9 minutes or so are mostly just wrapping up the video as a whole. So you see, he spends a good 6 or 7 minutes on this, of which 6 minutes is devoted to just going over interview quotes where different writers and directors were either willing to acknowledge or not that 8 episodes was a creative choice.
From what I found, it's no one person that is responsible for the poor writing, but more the fact that the main creators are not all on the same page and seem to be in unacknowledged chaos. I'm gonna be real, the dysfunction and disconnects that I've seen explains so much about House of the Dragon, and more than any singular dive into Hess could. So to end this needlessly long deep dive, we're going to be looking not just at Hess and Condal, but at directors Gita Patel and Claire Kilner, along with director and producer Miguel Sapochnik. And speaking of the season's ending, let me give you an example of how mixed up the creative team seems to be. In an interview with Entertainment Weekly, Hess said that the season going from 10 episodes to 8 was, quote, not really our choice. Hess is pretty clear here that HBO either ordered a shortened season, some suspect because of budgeting reasons, or that some extenuating circumstance caused the shortening. In any case though, Sarah Hess's admission was that the length wasn't their go-to narrative call. However, this stands in direct opposition to what others on the creative team have said. Hollywood Reporter interviewer James Hibbard asked director Claire Kilner, "Can you give us a sense of why it made more sense for House of the Dragon to go shorter, with 8 episodes in the new season instead of 10. Ryan's decision was to give it a good opening and a good ending, and they're jam-packed with emotional and visually exciting events. That's kinda weird, right? When asked why the episode count was reduced, Kilner said that Condal made a purposeful pacing move in order to have a good opening and a good ending. So from Kilner's words, the 8-episode length was a choice. It was, as she said, Ryan's decision, which is opposite to Hess saying it wasn't their choice.
This isn't really strong evidence of anything. He's just saying Hess was willing to admit it wasn't a creative choice. This goes against what Condal said originally. Yes, of course, they are unwilling to acknowledge that they're fighting with the studio over the budget. Then he cites that, well, Kilner, one of the directors, were distinct from the writers, was, willing to toe the party line. That this is obviously politician speak, and I don't blame them for this. I like all of these people. That, well, didn't we manage to make a beautiful finale and end it strong and everything? And it's just, how much is Savage reading into this? And the weird thing is that he treats what Patel said in another interview as if it was a smoking gun when it isn't. He goes, and here's the real doozy, when she's just repeating what Kilner said.
Second, this seems to directly align with what Hess says about its not being their choice. However, this is very different from what director Claire Kilner said about it being a purposeful decision by Condal in order to give it a good opening and good ending. But the real doozy comes when we listen to final episode director Gita Patel tell her side. When speaking about Alicent and Rhaenyra's conversation being the final scene of the season finale, she said, "I had to figure out how to interpret the script and design the last shots. And it was a tall order because I knew some people might be expecting a big war, the escalation of episode 7. Gita Patel's outlook here is that both Sarah Hess and Ryan Condal purposefully did not include the Battle of the Gullet for artistic reasons. She says that they could have, but instead chose the brave option of going for a conversational scene instead. But what Gita Patel said here stands in the face of everything previously said. Every single member of the core creative group has a different conception for both the narrative and production reasons for why the season ended how it did. It is genuinely baffling that there can be this much disconnect, but unfortunately, it seems to be a feature rather than a bug.
That isn't a doozy or a smoking gun. That Patel just said what Kilner said. They have the same view.
When asked why the episode count was reduced, Kilner said that Condal made a purposeful pacing move in order to have a good opening and a good ending. But the real doozy comes when we listen to final episode director Gita Patel tell her side. Gita Patel's outlook here is that both Sarah Hess and Ryan Condal purposefully did not include the Battle of the Gullet for artistic reasons.
And somehow this turned into Savage says each of these 4 creatives I'm citing, writers and directors, have a different opinion or view on why they have 8 episodes instead of 10. Look at the chaos they're in.
Every single member of the core creative group has a different conception for both the narrative and production reasons for why the season ended how it did.
These are not 4 different standpoints that Kilner said the same thing Patel said. And it's not different interpretations or creative instructions. It's Condal later was edging around the awkwardness of, I don't want to admit I'm fighting with the studio, and we've come to accept that. He's working his way around it indirectly. And it's annoying, but I understand why he's doing it. So I'm cutting a lot of this for time, because most of this is Savage reading off the interviews, and I mean, you read it off as if it's this big bombshell when it isn't. Just in terms of the confident vocal delivery and inflection, when on paper this is not strong evidence of anything, one way or the other. I don't even know why you're citing this, because otherwise there really isn't evidence of other production falling apart. And the level of accusation you're making that it was complete chaos behind the scenes on the set culture, that things were falling apart, I don't know how you did this. That was the biggest section. The rest of these will go more clearly without as many clips. Point 2 is he tries to make the argument that there were, okay, what are examples of writers disagreeing with each other on story points, not the choice to, oh, we have 8 episodes, it's really fighting with the studio. The one example he cites is from a single THR interview, which was with both Hess and Kilner, in which they ask the open-ended philosophical question, is Aegon redeemable, that he has committed assault against women, but he realizes he's very flawed, that, and these are things Savage himself says in the Aegon section of the longer video, that, well, he was never taught consent, he doesn't know better, that he's flawed, that isn't an excuse, but he's really screwed up. Is he capable of being reformed and realizing he did bad things? And that's an interesting question. I mean, one of the top 10 series on TV today is the animated adaptation of Invincible, where a major point is that the Viltrumites they're indoctrinated to believe that they should be these space Nazis who are genociding people. And one character who has committed multiple planetary genocides and has killed thousands of people personally, one of the Viltrumites later admits, I feel terrible about what I did. I was indoctrinated. The more time I spent away from the homeworld, the more I realized how evil it was. I didn't know any better. And this is a question going back thousands of years of if someone genuinely repents of their actions, can they be forgiven or achieve redemption? The biggest part is we're not psychic. We can't look into someone's mind and see are they being honest. But if someone honestly realizes the error of their ways, should you forgive them? These are the questions with Jaime Lannister in the main book. All of that. And this, I thought he'd be citing examples of, like, we have cited examples of when Benioff and Weiss were fighting with their directors, with, like, Neil Marshall said they'd come on set and give conflicting orders to actors on how to play scenes, and I was really annoyed at them for going behind my back like that, and I told them, look, if you put your foot down, you're my boss anyway. Why didn't you just order me to do it? That instead you snuck around when you could have given me a direct order? Aren't you the guy in charge? You need to sneak around giving conflicting orders? This makes no sense. So he only really cited that one non-example.
Considering the writing of Aegon, Sarah Hess has said, quote, "It's simplistic to say he raped someone, he's horrible and evil, and we can never find anything likable or interesting in him. I think there are many otherwise fairly decent, upstanding men walking around this world who possibly committed some type of unwanted sexual advance in college and have no idea what kind of effect it had on the person and genuinely think of themselves as a good person. I think just because somebody has committed this act, that is not a reason that we can't have a more nuanced discussion or even to feel sympathy for him." And in the same interview, director Claire Kilner said, "I don't have sympathy for rapists."
Which you couldn't, that you have to have a cited quote of not just interpretation, but giving conflicting sets of orders. That if Tom Glencarney said, well, Condal told me to play this scene angry, but Hess told me to play it sad, that would be creative chaos, and we have no examples of that. Moving along, we get to point 3 of 7, which makes even less sense, and which the video doesn't really spend much time developing, but just throws out as an accusation. That there was production chaos because there's one quote of they added some CGI in post-production.
But the summary I'm going to give is going to make things more clear and sadly more confusing too. Condal is very clearly saying here that he had to rebalance the season because of resources, construction, armor, VFX, Basically, money. He then specifically names the Battle of the Gullet and speaks on how they moved it back to a later season so that it could be given the proper resources to be made.
When we storyboarded the sequence and we previewed it and we budgeted it, we're like, okay, yeah, it's big. And then we shot it. It went amazingly well. But when we got into post, it was so good that the scene doubled in size. So we got twice as many dragon shots. And can I tell you, each dragon shot is very expensive. I mean, it's like owning a dragon.
First, this gives us an answer to why the season was shortened. Resources. As the showrunner, it's Condal's job to manage the show's finances and budget.
This was important enough and straightforward enough that I already posted it as a short standalone clip. That post-production is by definition after production. And in that video clip you just saw, Savage alleges that, well, we see where the budget went. Are you claiming that they ran out of budget halfway through filming and therefore did not have 10 episodes but 8? Is this what you are claiming? Verbalize it. Please say in words, in the comment section, tell me what he is saying here, and I want Savage to tell me. I'm not treating this as taunting, but please, you put this out into the world, and we have people saying, look at the production falling apart. Are you saying this one clip, you only had one clip, you should have multiple clips proving this is a pattern. You have one clip saying, we added a few extra dragon shots of CGI during post-production. Therefore, the physical aspects of production were going off the rails, and we didn't get 10 episodes.
The main creators are not all on the same page and seem to be in unacknowledged chaos.
This happened after they wrapped filming. They announced there would be 8 episodes in April 2023, right before filming began, so they couldn't have run out halfway. And seasons aren't filmed in episode order, they're filmed out of order, so they wouldn't just run out. You film the final stuff first in some cases. What exactly are you claiming happened? Oh, this is where they ran. We have zero evidence of production falling apart. They have generally been pretty good with how they organize their money on things, knowing when to use a digital set or to build a full one. And I really don't know how you're getting at this, that this has even less evidence, somehow less than zero, less evidence, then there might be some story contradiction. No, I don't even think of any story disagreement. Are you saying that they just mismanaged their money and set in... Well, Sapochnik would have organized the set culture. You need to cite evidence if you're going to claim that, and we don't have any.
Miguel Sapochnik rose to fame because of his Emmy-winning directorial work on Game of Thrones, mainly for his directing of the most cinematic and complex moments in the show's history, such as Hardhome, the Battle of the Bastards, and possibly the best sequence in modern fantasy, Cersei's bombing of the Sept. His mind and artistic vision perfectly captured what Game of Thrones should be, both on a character level and on a large scale. So it was really no surprise when he was brought on to be the director and co-showrunner for House of the Dragon Season 1. Miguel Sapochnik, having years of Game of Thrones production under his belt, was meant to be a guiding force and a cultural steady hand for some of the new members of the creative team, like Sarah Hess, Geeta Patel, and Claire Kilner, all of whom had never worked on a Game of Thrones project before. What is definitely certain is that Miguel Sapochnik did not come back for Season 2. And aside from George R. R. Martin, he was the only connection on the creative team to Game of Thrones. And that sudden departure left Ryan Condal, a man who had never produced or showrun a fantasy, in charge of the entire creative team of arguably the biggest show on Earth. And remember, Miguel was not just supposed to be an experienced director, he was supposed to be the guy managing the set culture of these new creatives. But that didn't happen.
All of this builds up to that, I mean, Savage really put Sapochnik on a pedestal. That is point 4, and I really think he needs to reassess this, because it's wrong in a couple of levels. I already posted as a standalone clip that he says Sapochnik was the last Game of Thrones link, when Alan Taylor was a very prominent Game of Thrones link in charge of their big battle scenes. Admittedly, Taylor did not have showrunner status on season 2, but that's sort of the point, that I feel, Savage, you're reading into this too much, that Sapochnik was given showrunner status. He wanted that status so they couldn't overrule him. That on Game of Thrones, Benioff and Weiss had no idea how production worked. That is what physical production dysfunction looks like. Infamously, like Battle of the Bastards, when they said, oh, you can teach horses to make a stage fall in 2 weeks. And he's like, no, it takes 6 weeks. We'll make it happen in 2. I can't. That's physically how long it takes horses to do that. Or the absurdity of... Savage even cites Sapochnik did the Long Night battle. He's experienced.
Miguel was not just supposed to be an experienced director, he was supposed to be the guy managing the set culture of these new creatives. I can nearly guarantee you that if Miguel Sapochnik stayed around, there would have been a big battle to end the season. The man directed the Battle of the Bastards, the Long Night, and the attack on King's Landing. There was no way he would have let the season end on such a dud.
I do not blame Sapochnik for the problems with the Long Night battle. In the documentaries that I posted on my channel, you see him and Deborah Riley saying these orders are absurd. They have no idea what they're ordering us to do. The timetable is delusional. I don't even know how they're getting these numbers. And they're like ordering us to build fully furnished $1,000 interiors that they know the camera will never be pointed at. That the Winterfell set had a fully functional bakery and brewery that they never filmed. That the King's Landing street set, 17 alleyways with furnished interiors, that they then in the behind-the-scenes thing realized, we never filmed most of this. And it was a waste of money. Or Benioff and Weiss laughing at how they ordered someone to spend $10,000 in 3 days of work time they didn't have, building a staircase when Jon goes into the Red Keep the last time, that ultimately wasn't on camera. And they're just laughing about it. Or... ha, we made Deborah Riley build the Winter Town as a fully realized set for all of 3 seconds of footage we didn't need to do. That is what dysfunction looks like. So when he came on to House of the Dragon, Sapochnik insisted, I want co-showrunner status so I can never be overruled about something that absurd again, and they said, okay. And Condal delegated most of he deferred to him on matters of physical production, if this is too expensive, that kind of thing. By his own admission, Sapochnik said I wasn't in the writer's room. Is Savage claiming that Sapochnik had story vision and story pitches in the writer's room? He just talks about, the set culture, and saying Sapochnik would have definitely ended with a battle is a story-level decision that Sapochnik wasn't really involved with. That what exactly that he's really leaning into, well, he was credited as co-showrunner, he isn't the co-writer. And another point is that Savage really seems to think that he could order around the other directors, and that because, well, he has experience. There's a point where where Savage says Condal was inexperienced because he only did one TV show before this, as showrunner on Colony for 3 seasons, which wasn't as big of a physical production, admittedly. Therefore, Sapochnik had more experience than he did, and it fell apart without him.
What is definitely certain is that Miguel Sapochnik did not come back for season 2. And aside from George R. Martin, he was the only connection on the creative team to Game of Thrones. And that sudden departure left Ryan Condal, a man who had never produced or showrun a fantasy, in charge of the entire creative team of arguably the biggest show on Earth. And remember, Miguel was not just supposed to be an experienced director, he was supposed to be the guy managing the set culture of these new creatives. But that didn't happen.
Sapochnik had never been credited as a showrunner on anything before. So despite these clips, Condal was so inexperienced compared to Sapochnik, Condal officially had more experience in the managerial position of showrunner than Sapochnik did, who had never been a showrunner. And if you're going to present the argument that, well, being a director means that Sapochnik has the experience of organizing other people, listen to yourself. That it doesn't matter that he was never a showrunner. Being a director means that you know how to organize things. That circles right back around to he is accusing Kilner and Patel of being neophyte directors who did not know what they were doing, when they had as much experience as Sapochnik in terms of organizing, directing TV episodes. Maybe not a giant battle episode or something, they weren't doing battle episodes. That those were the ones Taylor was doing. So how are you building this argument that Condal was not as experienced as a showrunner as a manager as Sapochnik, Sapochnik who had no prior experience as a showrunner, and then disparaging the other directors for not having it when they had as much as he did? Where are you going with this? And to get ahead of myself, that he bluntly blames, at the end of the video, the clip here, I guess his conclusion is he drops the physical production stuff without acknowledging it couldn't be true, and accuses, I guarantee there would have been a battle if Sapochnik was in charge. This is the very end of the video. And Condal and Hess and their team, or whatever, made the conscious, he believes these interviews are going, no, we're not fighting with the studio because they want to badmouth them. He concludes that Condal and Hess, as a creative choice, thought the big Rhaenyra-Alicent meeting, Rhaenysant, was better drama than a battle when they wanted a battle. He claims they did this on purpose because they like it more, and Sapochnik would have had the sense not to do that. Check out the clip.
What is definitely certain is that Miguel Sapochnik did not come back for season 2. And aside from George R. Martin, he was the only connection on the creative team to Game of Thrones. I can nearly guarantee you that if Miguel Sapochnik stayed around, there would have been a big battle to end the season. The man directed the Battle of the Bastards, the Long Night, and the attack on King's Landing. There was no way he would have let the season end on such a dud as a season finale. Geeta Patel's outlook here is that both Sarah Hess and Ryan Condal purposefully did not include the Battle of the Gullet for artistic reasons. She says that they could have, but instead chose the brave option of going for a conversational scene instead. But none of these talented individuals can seem to move in narrative lockstep for any meaningful length of time. Maybe that was because Sapochnik was supposed to be the unifying force and left. Maybe it's because the individual strengths don't cover each other's weaknesses. But whatever the case, the post-mortem on season 2 comes down to not only the creators having a fundamental misunderstanding on how to pace and create drama, but a fundamental misunderstanding of each other.
Not only is this physically not matching the evidence, is Savage aware that Rhaenysant was arguably Miguel Sapochnik's idea?
I was reluctant to go back and do the same thing because I'd been doing it for like 7 years or 4 years. I don't know. It felt like a lifetime. I had said publicly and on film that I was never going to go and do it again, so I was reluctant to go back on everything I'd said. But the more that we talked and the more we got into the weeds of the show, realizing and finding a perspective from which to tell the story, which was like the female perspective, it just opened up the possibilities and it became fresh again, at least to me in my mind. And I think that, you know, it was something that Ryan embraced. It was something that we all responded to, and you know, you're away. And then, I mean, to be absolutely honest, we then cast Olivia Cook and Emma Darcy, and they were just like the icing on the cake.
I mean, I just don't think it was any accident. Like, Ryan and Miguel spoke very like clearly and determinedly to both of us, even like in the midst of the audition process, in saying that this is a story structured around two women.
Yeah.
And Miguel says a nice thing about that being a good enough reason to return to Westeros, which is, you know, just a universe that requires such respect that he needed he needed a good enough reason to brave the return.
That I like what people have said in my comment sessions on the first videos in this series, that group writing and creativity, it's a group process with different people contributing different things. Like, who truly created Spider-Man? that when Stan Lee was, well, he's the guy at the head of the writers room. This happened with a lot of Marvel things, a lot of Marvel characters or group projects. But like, well, one guy came up with the idea of the web shooters, another one came up with the idea of the radioactive spider, and it was very much a co-production. It wasn't one writer, because they had a staff model like that. That we have known since season 1 that the way they told it to us is that the person who got the idea that in the books Alicent is 9 years older than Rhaenyra, but she looks young for her age, and it does stress when she married her father they were on friendly terms, but as soon as she had a son a few years later, started supporting her son against Rhaenyra. But just brief mention, because it's an outline, that they had a good relationship at first, and then it soured, but they used, their family at first. It was Miguel Sapochnik's wife, actually, told him, hey, maybe we should even stress this more by making Alicent and Rhaenyra the same age. So they're outright not just friendly, but the same age teenager best friends, who later have a falling out. Sapochnik thought it was a great idea, and brought it to the rest of the creative staff, the writers and directors and everyone. Then, and these are two separate things, near as we can tell, after everyone was cast on set, the way they told us this, is Emily Carey said, I developed the idea that this has the intensity of a romantic relationship, because when you're a young girl, your friendships tend to have the same intensity as that. That was my idea, and the writers liked it, is how we were told this. And it's hard to say, like, who exactly's idea was it? Did Millie Alcock contribute to that as well? Did they play it up? It certainly had to go through the other actors as well for the older ones. But apparently it developed organically from multiple people. The friendship originated, even if this didn't have a romantic aspect, the idea that the story is platonically framed around the platonic friendship falling apart between Rhaenyra and Alicent, and you think this has more drama, so they felt comfortable ending season 2 on it. They didn't. They were frantically trying to end it on some sort of dramatic note to salvage what they could, because they knew they couldn't. They were denied the budget for a battle by the studio. Even if you don't accept this has romantic overtones, but purely friendship overtones, the one person most responsible for that was Miguel Sapochnik, who championed that. It's only a matter of, would I say, flavoring or accenting? That Carrie, according to them, said, I thought this would have this intense relationship would also have, friendship would have romantic overtones, which arguably has less impact than simply making them best friends. That's on Sapochnik. Are you genuinely unaware of this? Then again, the first part, Savage, the first part of your video, it's, and I want, if you ever make a follow-up, directly address this. The part where you say, we have had this quote for 2 years, arguably Emily Carey came up with it, and we've been debating or blaming, however you land on the spectrum of blame or praise, Emily Carey for doing this. Savage even provides this quote. Emily Carey said, well, this is my idea, and then immediately says, look at how intense Hess's influence was over the cast. Carey didn't say, Hess influenced me to do this. Savage just said, well, clearly this is Hess influencing the cast and crew and reading into it. Carey said, more or less unambiguously, the romantic angle was my idea. And Sapochnik has repeatedly said, not romantic, but platonically, this intense friendship that later turned into enemies. Like, various friends that turned into, friendships that turned into, Obi-Wan versus Anakin, they have this brotherly relationship and they turn into enemies. Kirk and Spock, these are platonic relationships. Or brotherly love, not romantic love. Define love, damn it! But, sorry, it's a joke about Kirk and Spock. But the point is, sure, he loved Spock. Was he in love with him? Sorry, but point is, the idea of framing this as a falling out between best friends was Sapochnik's idea, and you spend all of this video smearing these experienced, good directors, Kilner's probably my favorite director on the whole thing, as neophytes, and who didn't know how to do anything. Even when, like, Alan Taylor was there, who is most certainly not a neophyte, and Sapochnik's job was never to, you pretty much say his job was to keep all the other creatives in line.
Miguel Sapochnik, having years of Game of Thrones production under his belt, was meant to be a guiding force and a cultural steady hand for some of the new members of the creative team, like Sarah Hess, Geeta Patel, and Claire Kilner, all of whom had never worked on a Game of Thrones project before.
The exact quote you just heard, Sapochnik was meant to be a guiding force and cultural steady hand for some of the new members of the creative team. Not just Patel and Kilner, who were directors, and he did establish the cinematography style that they were going to have. They do say that was Sapochnik. But he was meant to be a guiding, steady hand for Sarah Hess, who is, and earlier in the video he said that she is a very experienced writer from House and Orange is the New Black. So what exactly do you mean by character experience? She isn't experienced at running battle episodes. Hess didn't write a lot of the battles, or would defer to the director and stunt coordinators to come up with some. Verbalize what you were accusing Hess of being insufficient about. That Hess wouldn't realize the importance of having a battle in the finale. Hess was the one who broke ranks bravely, was the first person right when season 2 began to actually, and we were stunned when, because we'd had 2 years of Condal going, everything's okay, and I understand why Condal did that. I'm not angry at him. He doesn't want to fight with the parent company. Hess is the one who was the first to come out and say it really wasn't a creative choice. And you accuse her of not knowing how important ending with an expensive battle is, when she's the one who broke ranks and admitted that this wasn't our choice. So are you saying that Sarah Hess is insufficient at writing dialogue and drama scenes? Of people talking in rooms as people deride it, which is like all of HBO's Succession or Netflix's The Crown are character drama pieces. But, well, she never worked as a director on Game of Thrones, therefore she's a bad writer. But one doesn't flow from the other. What are you talking about? He specifically says because they didn't work on Game of Thrones before. And assuredly Sapochnik was the one holding season 1 together because he was more experienced as a showrunner, which he never was. You see how points 1 through 4 out of 7 here are linked, because it's leading up to his central argument that Sapochnik leaving led to chaos behind the scenes, when we have no evidence of that, and the evidence he tries to cite isn't really evidence of anything, just they want to talk about fighting with the studio and all that, but those overlap. Point 5 I actually want to cut short, because I am not trying to taunt Alex Savage in this, and I hope he actually watches this to reassess everything. So if you're listening to Savage, I am not trying to mock you for point 5 here. But I need to point this out, which is that you accuse Condal and his team of, by season 2 without Sapochnik, being inconsistent, when many parts of the video you made are themselves inconsistent. I wonder if you rushed this out. I mean, people in my comment section are saying, relative to other videos made by Savage Books, this felt rough around the edges. To start with, the failures in evidence that Sapochnik wasn't the last Game of Thrones director linked. Alan Taylor was a prominent Game of Thrones director, and he came in on season 2. Other things like that, but I'm not going to go through all these line by line, but just production-wise, throughout Savage's video, there are a lot of spelling errors. And one of the things Savage presents is that he is a professional book editor, that his job is to look for mistakes and revise things, and that there's little spelling errors throughout. And I don't know, does Savage do his own graphics? Some people who are successful big channels don't do their own graphics. But the section I told everyone to skip to at 1 hour, 13 minutes through the end on who bears responsibility. Bearing responsibility is spelled B-E-A-R, like the animal, not B-A-R-E, like naked. And little things like that, but just on a lot of the cards here, there's little spelling errors. And I'm one to talk. I make spelling errors all the time because I rush videos out to cover news, but my point is, if someone will go, why are you making these accusations? These are little errors rough around the edges which could have been fixed with revision and rewrites. Why aren't you extending the same courtesy to Ryan Condal and Sarah Hess's team? That, again, like I said at the beginning, I don't know if Savage Books realizes that the writer's strike did affect House of the Dragon. They later admitted that we weren't allowed to do live rewrites, and it really affected the show. And George R. R. Martin himself has remarked on the importance of that live revision process, that they could do some reshoots. They later admitted we couldn't do all the reshoots we wanted to do because of limits of time and budget, so you can tell they prioritized certain episodes over others in terms of revision, and even if they had all the time to do reshoots, retroactive reshoots can only do so much compared to the live rewrites, live revision, comparing notes. So little things that were rough around the edges in that this just highlights how important it is to have an editor, revisions, rewrites. And I'm not going to read them all because I don't want to taunt Savage for this, just why aren't we extending the same courtesy that even if they were doing things I disagree with, the phrase Savage uses is that, well, I have proven that undoubtedly Hess really did this, when you didn't prove it beyond a doubt because I don't agree with the evidence. I don't think your evidence holds up. The phrase I'm looking for is like in a court of law, beyond a reasonable doubt. That threshold of reasonable doubt, that if that is a really good excuse, we weren't allowed to do rewrites because of a strike. I cannot, within reasonable doubt, say if certain problems were due to that or to other things. So, speeding right along, this leads to point 6, which is I don't feel Savage built up a very strong argument, but devil's advocate, for those of you in the comments who really didn't like how the show went, or season 2 is inconsistent, I feel that all of that can be, or at least most of it, can be or could plausibly be explained by lack of rewrites. Little examples. Well, there's little examples and there's the big examples. For little examples, it's things like the Riverlords barely tolerate Daemon, and in episode 7, then by episode 8, they're just taking his orders without comment. I think on the level of rewrites would have fixed that a little bit. Oh, they're being a little snide with him still, that they're not exactly warming up to him. That's within the threshold of rewrites would fix that. As for large-scale core writing decisions, that's different, and we will continue to discuss that. My point here is simply that these were not inconsistent changes, but consistent changes we disagree with. Originating in Season 1, that Savage said that they made Daemon evil. Other people are saying that they whitewashed him, so that's hard to judge across the series as a whole. But looking at Rhaenyra and Alicent, like, shout out Lord Commander Dunn and everything in the comments, saying I really don't agree that I think they were consistent changes we don't agree with. Alicent's story arc isn't that she randomly flip-flops between hating Rhaenyra and then wanting peace. It's back in Season 1, and people going, oh, she's the same person who tried to stab Rhaenyra. Yeah, and then there was a whole scene where she felt really guilty about it and ashamed, then a 6-year time skip. And we get the thing that since then she has grown remorseful. Throughout episode 8, they show she doesn't want to literally go to war. She's hesitant to because she isn't really a violent person, on the fence at least. Then mishearing a prophecy, which I think was kind of gimmicky, but okay, it is a reason. Oh, I thought maybe he really wanted Aegon to be king. Then when Rhaenyra says, no, he didn't, that's a different prophecy, she switches to, I'm not supporting this. That isn't flip-flopping for no reason. They gave reasons that would affect her behavior. Rhaenyra, similarly, people going, she was in shock and going, I want Aemond in the first episode. Well, then why did... there is a tension within Rhaenyra between, I want what's mine, but my father told me to keep the realms together and not plunge them into war. And that's kind of the conflict in the human heart tension that she has. And I think they should, again, rewrites, I think they should have explained better. I thought it was that her half-nephew being brutally murdered in his own bed shocked her out of wanting immediate revenge. That, okay, here's your revenge. And she was so hard. They should have had a scene explaining that I'm now really horrified by blood and cheese. Is there no way to stop this cycle of bloodshed? That it needed revisions and a scene here, a line there. I never felt this was inconsistent or random. I felt that they were trying to show a gray character with conflicting emotions. We can debate this. But in regard to Savage's video where he says the stress on Rhaenys is because Sapochnik left, all of that originated in the end of Season 1. That thing of, wait, she was the person who wanted to stab Rhaenyra in Episode 7, Driftmark, but by Episode 9 she was against fighting. That back and forth tension was in Season 1 itself. And even in the rest of his videos, Savage admits Rhaenys was good in Season 1, as seeing this friendship breakup that just... I myself feel that I don't have a problem with it. I just feel it's eating up... They needed to fine-tune that it was eating up too much screen time. They needed to make it leaner, because it was taking screen time away from other secondary characters who had their time cut, like Jane Eyre and Cragen Stark are barely in it, that kind of thing. But time-wise, that's time management more than the other stuff, in general principle. Another issue, which I am not addressing in this video, but I'm acknowledging as part of dialectic discourse, is the accusation Savage brings up, and many in the comments have, that we feel they're whitewashing Alicent and Rhaenyra compared to the book version, or that not having Alicent be a schemer is taking away her narrative agency, which she wasn't the central schemer in the book anyway. I mean, but by the time Otto is kicked out, she doesn't really do that much after Aegon is crowned. But even then, I am worried about what the heck is Alicent even going to do in Season 3. That there are accusations of, well, if you take away all the really gray parts, if it's a fine balance, like Daemon killed a kid, maybe by accident, and how do we still make him a flawed but character you support? Like Jaime, again, the Jaime Lannister thing of, how do you make this someone who you can still support after they did something bad? Or Book Tyrion strangled Shae in a fit of jealousy after she slept with his father. She did not go for a weapon. And he does very gray things. So I give them the leeway of it's really hard to write a gray character who isn't Arya Stark. Like Jaime and Tyrion types are very hard to write. And unfortunately, one of the selling points of the Dance of the Dragons era prequel is that Rhaenyra, Daemon, and Alicent are very flawed characters, but there is a tension between labeling this as inconsistent versus gray character who has conflicting internal emotions. There is a discussion to have with that, but my point is I don't feel it rises to the level of accusing the... I accuse the writers of whitewashing before I accuse them of being inconsistent. I think they are intentionally doing things. They're not dysfunctional behind the scenes. They do plan these things, I feel. I haven't felt it was all over the place, or at least some things needed refinement because of the lack of rewrites. And particularly the accusation that, well, this went off the rails. This was in Season 1. So those are the big core things with those three characters. As for everyone else, little things from episode to episode I felt could have definitely needed fine-tuning because of the lack of rewrites from the strike. Which leaves me with point 7. Point 7, I didn't really define this well at the beginning because I'm uncomfortable with it. I don't like how this was presented led to how it was received. That it felt like a hit piece on Sarah Hest, and other people said it wasn't. That the conclusion of the video firmly says things fell apart without Sapochnik, and frames it as it isn't Sarah Hess's fault. Other people should have been coordinating and reining her in better, or they should have been coordinating with each other. So it still says that Rhaenys is stressing feminism too far, or Daemon is white. Well, it just says it was due to lack of coordination, but at the inconsistency of it's both due to lack of coordination and someone's pushing an agenda, which, as I said, was 0.5. I don't know what the message is, but when you look at how, I do not know if Savage meant this on purpose, but if you're listening to me, I hope you reassess that the people in your comment sections are being fueled by this, and the trolls are running with it, and coming over to our comment sections on other channels, going, well, of course Hess is the crazy feminist ruining it, gay feminist ruining everything, which I do not think was his intent, to stress that. But what I'm building up to is, if Savage Books did not want to make an identity politics hit piece, why is the cover image for his video of Shirako Lohar played by a trans actor, which was a lightning rod for online people? And this character basically is trans in the books, or they put a twist on I thought was interesting, that Recalio Rindoon is a man who likes to dress up as a woman. He's basically a trans woman. So they said, well, let's make Shirako Lohar, this minor character, let's basically make it a trans man, that it's this biological female who acts as a man, gets called a man by the leadership of the triarchy, but it's complicated, gender fluid. And they cast a trans woman to play a trans, and I thought it was interesting the way they played it. Oh, it's like the other way around. It's fine. Something like 9 minutes before the end of this really long hour-and-a-half video, the final section, and it is a full section, he labels it Lohar, Savage goes into talking about Shirako Lohar, and it actually doesn't sound transphobic. And if anything, he really stresses, I feel it was, if you're going to put a trans character and actor in, don't put them in the finale. And the fact that Lohar, any new character is introduced in the last episode, is a sign of dysfunction, because you're not supposed to do that, and it didn't give the character enough attention.
And look, I have no problem with people of different sexualities, genders, races, or backgrounds appearing in fiction. In fact, I welcome it. But what I do have a problem with is when the context of a character's backstory is necessary to understand them, while the writer also doesn't give us time to get to know them. To reiterate, Lohar has like 12 minutes of screen time in the finale. If Condal wanted to make a character representative of gender-fluid people, or gender non-binary people, why would he do it at the very end with no time left on the clock?
If anything, we were citing that as evidence that Episode 8 wasn't intended to be the finale, it wasn't a creative choice. That scripts 9 and 10 are sitting on a shelf somewhere. I don't know how you look at the same evidence to get the different conclusion, like looking at Emily Carey saying Rhaenys romantic level was my idea, and going, well, clearly Hess influenced Carey. How do you look at, well, Lohar being in the final episode is proof of their dysfunction and that they thought they could get away with the creative choice of Episode 8 being the finale, that this is evidence they didn't want to do that. But it isn't a transphobic hit piece. That Savage goes on in detail saying, I feel that it was important enough that this character should have been introduced earlier. I'm saying the writers probably wanted to do that too in terms of time and pacing. What I am confused about is this video is about claiming Sapochnik leaving ruined everything and that the writers really like Rhaenys. Why is the cover image of the trans actor role? This has no bearing on the central argument. And I don't know if Savage Books intended this as online drama baiting, but it sure functionally became that. If it went out of his control, I don't know. I am not trying to put words in his mouth, but just this is flame-inducing. Why is... And the words on the title card, Gay Rhaenyra, No Battle, Daemon, Trans Pirate. What the trans pirate thing doesn't even have anything to do with most of what this video is about. Gay Rhaenyra, and some people in the comment section argue to me, I think he's just using inductive reasoning, which is, they theorize that Savage Books wanted to hook in people who were accusing that Rhaenyra Alicent was bad and set them straight by pointing out Hess couldn't have done this as fanfic as one person. In which case, why isn't the cover image of Sarah Hess? Like, if I was making this video, I'd be having an image of Sarah Hess, Rhaenyra and Alicent, and Sapochnik. Why is the trans actor who is barely part of this video stressed so much, unless it was trying... I think Savage needs to assess whether this was the right messaging. And if he ever makes a reaction, I feel it was inappropriate to stress Lohar as your cover image. And going through your comment section, a lot of the people in your comments are saying transphobic things. Things I would have weeded out. I make no mistake when people say if you have a constructive thing to say about the way they handled a trans character, but people just coming on my comments saying, oh, here's the trans agenda, I just permanently block without a second thought. It takes 2 seconds. If you're going to do a Savage Books, when in his actual section, he's not criticizing having a trans character in this. He said, I didn't feel they gave it the time it deserved being in the final episode. Well and good, but that isn't really what this video is about. Why is this the cover image? In terms of the way he framed the video overall, and in terms of Sarah Hess, I feel structurally, I didn't get the sense this was a hit. Even after everything, I don't get the sense this was a hit piece against Sarah Hess. But that he didn't clearly state enough. My theory is that production was falling apart as a whole, that other people should have reined in Sarah Hess, when the things you're accusing that they needed to rein in, like Hess having Daemon kill his wife, was actually Condal's idea, that you need to prove these were even Hess's idea in the first place, much less that they needed to be reined in. We have no evidence of creative dysfunction, to the point that you accuse there of being total unacknowledged chaos in the writer's room, which we have no evidence of. No evidence of. And somehow less of production dysfunction from a physical standpoint. There are budget arguments with Warner Discovery is deeply in debt and Zaslav is cutting everyone's episode budgets. This isn't even the only show it happened to. The Last of Us Season 2 had that. Will have that. It's coming. So I don't feel he clearly even said what he was trying to... I don't agree with his conclusion. And I think he was vague enough about it that it is being appropriated in the comment sections by people who are using it to fuel the usual online troll misogyny and misogyny, transphobia, and all of that. I mean, and the one, I don't know, I mean, I don't want to get into all this identity politics stuff. The real structural thing was, from a structural standpoint, if this video is about Hess, Rhaenysant, and Sapochnik, why is the cover image of Shiraka Lohar? That is trying to incite rather than a logical dialectic discussion. So I am not trying to insult Savage Books. I am not trying to taunt him. I am saying I have made bad videos I had to take down over time, and I don't know if I want to take this one down, but I want to make an update of Alan Taylor is a Game of Thrones director, that the problems in Season 2 are not due to Sapochnik leaving, that we have no evidence of inconsistency within the writer's room. What we do have evidence of is that Martin said he is upset at things coming in Season 3. Not Season 2, but apparently he was fine with knowing the writer's room, that apparently things in Season 3 bother him. I am hoping that these are purely truncated stories due to the episode cuts, that we need more than 8 episodes next season or all is lost. Well, not all, but you know what I mean. And that he's upset about that. That the cut from 10 to 8 episodes is Warner Discovery cut their funding right before a writer's strike when it was too late to rewrite into an 8-episode season, and desperately trying to come up with some sort of narrative climax. Do I have to spell this out? They said, let's have a big Rhaenyra Alicent confrontation because it's cheap. And it's at least something. It's what I would have done in their position, where you cut our battle budget. Let's have a big dramatic confrontation. There are certain changes I at least disagreed with that Condal made, or that we think they're making, like cutting Nettles is not a good idea. Even if you cut out most of her story, just why not introduce her, then kill her off in the Battle of the Gullet, because she doesn't really do that much after the Fall of Kings, just to introduce the idea that maybe that isn't how people claim Dragon, because her story is very anticlimactic at the end. Others have acknowledged this, of how would we do this with the end game between Rhaenyra and Daemon? That's a separate question I don't want to get into, but because we don't know what they're doing with Nettles exactly. They're probably cutting her, but I mean, what they always intended with her, we're not really sure. Maybe they set it up in season 1, but the point is, there is some disagreement with Martin, possibly due to episode cuts. We don't know. That is a question I've been addressing in my videos. How much? I have a video titled, How Much of This is Martin versus the studio, and how much is him versus Condal? But within Condal's creative team on season 2, we have no evidence of either creative story disagreements and dysfunction, or of physical production level dysfunction. What we're hoping for is that Zaslav gets pressured out of Warner Discovery before filming starts in March, which he might, because of how badly he's been doing this past quarter, and that they get someone else in who gives them the funding they need, or just the massive backlash. SNL last week made fun of the truncated episode count. It was cut for time, thankfully, because it actually wasn't a very good skit. But, you know, SNL. But it wasn't as good as the one they did for season 1, and it dragged on. But they were making fun of, wait, there's only 8 episodes? What's going on? That is a problem. I hope the backlash leads to more episodes. And my hope is that Savage Books reassesses. I don't even know if he's aware there was the writer's strike affected this in terms of rewrites. Did they stress Rhaenyra Alicent too much? Well, even Savage Books says it's not a problem that it was in season 1. It just felt like it was stressed too much, even though it's only 2 scenes. Like the whole nun thing in episode 3, I would have really cut that and just changed it into, like, Alicent invited her to have a meeting, have them meet in Duskendale or something. Why does this need to... The fact they turned it into a big sequence felt really needless. But that doesn't mean I think the show as a whole is falling apart. It's just they probably could have fixed that in rewrites or something. Or on paper, I remember being not as upset about it by episode 4, because, okay, we're getting rid of the prophecy. They should have just had a meeting in Duskendale on neutral ground or something, I don't know. I hope Savage Books reassesses this and makes an update of there are numerous points of evidence that you're not citing evidence that there was chaos, that people needed to rein in Hess. You cite things as Hess's decisions, good or bad, that we know were made by other people. We're still trying to figure out exactly what was going on behind the scenes, but the one thing we're pretty clear on is that Condal's team is working cohesively. It's a question of 3 things: Condal, Martin, and the studio. And who is fighting who, we're not really sure. This is the last video I'm going to make on this. I have not been trying to insult. I'm trying to not even critique. It's just I'm trying to hold back the misinformation. People were coming into my comments saying, well, of course there's dysfunction behind the scenes and inconsistencies. This isn't evidence of that. This ate up a lot of my time, and now I'm moving on to all the other report videos I put on hold for a month, because this video got a lot of traction in the off-season. How many other videos have gotten like 80,000 views talking about Season 2 since September 1st? And when a reputable, respected channel with a long and good, dignified history like Savage Books does this, I have to nudge and encourage that I really think you need to reassess this and consider making an update.